Love, the way God intended. The administrators of Washington Middle School could no longer sit idly by as the dangers of the outside world crept into their community, threatening their students, in heart and in mind and in body. Too many events had already occurred around the nation. The librarian in Oregon with the rainbow flag on her desk, the bus driver in New York who played gangster rap over the radio every morning, the group of 16-year-olds in Ohio with watermelon charms on their Crocs. They had seen too much to turn a blind eye. They had to be proactive, so they installed security procedures that rivaled any other in the nation. All who stepped foot on their campus first had to go through a multi-tiered security system. Teachers, students, parents, administrators. Even the mailman was subject to this high level of security, and security only increased once inside. Teams of police officers and retired soldiers with constantly loaded guns on their hips monitored the halls. Cameras were installed inside every classroom, down every hallway, throughout the playground, on the gates that surrounded the campus, and anywhere else a potential danger could possibly be. All potential employees had to go through intense background checks and psychiatric tests before they were even given the chance to interview for a job so near the youth of this great community. The school had to protect their kids. Mrs. Estrada was the 7th grade English teacher at Washington Middle School, but she had never wanted to be a teacher. After watching Michael Phelps win yet another gold medal as a kid, she wanted to be an Olympic swimmer. She had once considered becoming an astronaut or a veterinarian or maybe a fashion designer. For 2 years in high school, she thought going to the WNBA was a real possibility. And at one point in college, sitting in the library at 2 a.m, she thought life would have been a heck of a lot easier if she had just become a stripper. But in the end, following in the footsteps of her mother and father and all the other men and women she knew with a medical degree, she became a doctor. In particular, she became a pediatrician. And she was good at it. She did it for many years. But watching what was happening around the nation and hearing from her patients about the changes taking place in her local schools, she felt a sudden call to change her profession to education. She had heard her communities cry to protect their kids, and that's what she wanted to do. Protect the kids. So she sent in her application, underwent the required psychiatric evaluations, the intensive interview process, the years of additional schooling and training, and was now well into her 6th year as a 7th grade English teacher at Washington Middle School. She joined the back of the line for security, which was already wrapped around the corner even though school wasn't set to begin for another 45 minutes. Everyone in line waited patiently. Like her, they were used to these intricate, laborious security procedures, and many agreed that this was necessary for their kids' safety. As she waited, she altered the arm carrying her box of books, occasionally setting the box down to rest her arms entirely. When her turn finally came, she set the box on the conveyor belt, removed her shoes, belt, jewelry, and electronics, then walked through the body scanner. "Clear," said the first security guard, and onward she walked, to a second security guard who scanned her once more with a wand, just in case the body scanner missed anything. "Clear," said the second security guard. The box of books and the rest of her belongings were also scanned while a third security guard observed. Once the box had reached the other side, yet another security guard grabbed the top book, eyeing it. "These books received approval?" he asked. "Yes, sir." Mrs. Estrada pulled the signed paperwork from her pocket and handed it over. The security guard looked through the paperwork, checking the legitimacy of the signatures from the school board, principal, and state governor. He then compared the title on the paperwork with the top row of books. Everything matched. He handed the paperwork back to Mrs. Estrada, though his evaluation was far from complete, and picked up a copy from the top row, reading the title of the book and its author out loud, along with the description on the back of the book. Nodding approvingly, he removed the dust jacket and studied the boards, then carefully scanned the pages within to ensure they all matched with the description he had just read. Again, he nodded approvingly. Lastly, he went through the box, ensuring every cover matched those on the top of the box. Finally satisfied, the final security guard said, "Clear." When Mrs. Estrada got into her classroom, she kept the door locked, the blinds drawn, and the lights off. Relying on feel and faint outlines, she made her way to the back table, where she gently set down the box of books. Carefully, she removed each book and set them down in front of her. Each book had upon it a picture of a young boy and a young girl holding hands. Written in big, bold letters was the title of the book, Love, the Way God Intended. A raving review from the nation's most popular news organization called the book a triumph for American society and future generations. The story follows the lives of two elementary students who later married and started a family. They came from great, wealthy, religious households that blessed them with wonderful morals no other child around them seemed to have. And every time they found themselves tempted to behave like those around them, they needed only to hold their lover's hand and remember the morality placed in their hearts by their parents and their God. It was a beautiful telling of how God could defeat the evilness of humanity, a beautiful telling of how love could triumph evil, and a beautiful telling of what morality truly looked like. As Mrs. Estrada arranged the books on the desks around the class, one dust jacket slipped to reveal that underneath it was not an actual copy of Love, the Way God Intended, but rather a book called We Do Not All Love the Same, and That's Okay. A book that had been banned by her school district and many other districts and libraries throughout the state and nation for its inappropriate inclusion of same-sex relationships and drag queens and polygamy and other methods of love that did not align with the views of many. Mrs. Estrada quickly readjusted the jacket to ensure the book appeared like the others. She looked around nervously, at the cameras around her classroom, at the little cracks in the window, then hurried to her desk to grab some tape. As she finished taping the dust jacket to the book, the bell suddenly rang. Frantically, she opened the blinds, turned on the lights, returned the tape to her desk, and unlocked the door. She forced a smile as she welcomed the class with her usual, "Good morning," and "God bless." After the morning prayers had been spoken over the loudspeaker, Mrs. Estrada introduced the class to their new book by reading from the script provided to her by the school board. Love, the Way God Intended, she read, is a monumental novel taking the nation by storm for the morality it strives to return to American households. This story serves as a much-needed blueprint for how love and relationships should look in a society too often deceived by the devil and his advocates. It is the sort of book that has the potential to wipe away millions of sinful acts before they can even occur. The type of book that can change the actions of an entire society. The type of book that comes at the perfect time, delivering the perfect story. It is the book this nation needs to save itself from the... The script went on for several more minutes. Afterwards, she led the class in a short discussion about what they thought love should look like, and how it should feel, and whom that love should be between. She then assigned them a worksheet to help them reflect on that discussion. As they worked on the worksheet, she walked around the class, making sure all of their answers corresponded with the answer sheet the school board provided her. After collecting the worksheets, she ordered them to open their books to page number 7, where the prologue began. Once everyone had made it to the proper page, she began reading, and they all followed along, except for a certain 4 who found within not a copy of Love, the Way God Intended, like the dust jacket and Mrs. Estrada's instruction implied, but rather an entirely different book. We Do Not All Love the Same, and That's Okay. This was not the first time these 4 students had been assigned a book unlike the others, so they were not surprised to find that their books began on a completely different page and included words that did not match what Mrs. Estrada read aloud to the rest of the class. These students, like their books, were not like the others. They had souls that had been banned from the state where their bodies dwelled. Nor did their souls align with the world propagandized in the book that the school board demanded Mrs. Estrada read. In the simplest terms, they did not love in the way God intended. They did not present themselves to the world in the way their politicians preferred. They did not... The doors to the classroom opened, and in walked 3 police officers. "Random search," one of them declared as another stepped up to the nearest student's desk, grabbed their backpack, and dumped out their belongings. The 3 officers searched through the dumped-out items, finding a pencil box, a notebook, a binder, a textbook, and a lunch pail. One officer sifted through each item in the pencil box. Another carefully investigated every word written on the pages of the notebook, while the third did the same with the contents of the binder. Once every item had been evaluated, the officers dropped everything back on the desk. "Clear," said one of the officers. Onward they moved, on to the next student, where again the officer dumped out everything within their backpack. A loose pencil, a notebook, a pocket knife, a sandwich in a plastic bag, a handheld video game console, and even a handgun. The officers crowded around the table again. One lifted the gun and found it to be loaded. He rolled the bullets around in his hand before slotting them back inside the gun and then placing them back among the items. Another officer picked up the pocket knife and ejected each of the tools. Several seemed to have been freshly sharpened. One of them even cut the officer as he fiddled around with it. Then, "Clear," said one of the officers. They moved on to the next student, repeating the process over and over again, ensuring no illegal paraphernalia existed anywhere among the items. They cleared this student, then moved on to the next. Another half-dozen students later, the officers approached the first student who had on their desk a false copy of Love the Way God Intended. The officers grabbed this student's backpack, dumping their belongings on the desk. Among the mess was the hidden copy of We Do Not All Love the Same, and That's Okay. One officer picked up a notebook and looked at the content inside. "Whose initials are these?" The student panicked, knowing the initials did not belong to a person of the proper sex. Fortunately, several students at the school shared those initials, many of whom were of the proper sex. So the student randomly selected one and provided their name to the officer. Satisfied, the officer dropped the notebook to the desk. "Clear." All the while, Mrs. Estrada continued to read from the book and the students followed along, even as the officers prowled around the room. Mrs. Estrada's voice was shaky, and she often stumbled over her words, though she relaxed slightly as the officers cleared two more of the students she had provided with illegal reading material. When the officers poured out the backpack of the final student whose book differed from the others, the book itself was knocked to the floor, along with a few other items. As the student reached for the book, one officer stopped them. He then picked the book up himself, turning it over slowly. It was the same officer who had cleared Mrs. Estrada when she entered the school earlier that morning. His eyes fixated on a little strip of tape. He did not remember this from his earlier evaluation, or with any of the other books. He asked a nearby student for their pocket knife. Mrs. Estrada stopped reading. She could not move. She could not think. Everyone was watching now as the officer cut the tape. He returned the pocket knife to the student and removed the dust jacket from the book, revealing behind it, We Do Not All Love the Same, and That's Okay. All three officers drew their guns and aimed them at the student. "Get down on the ground! Put your hands on your head!" The third officer turned his gun on Mrs. Estrada. "Did you know about this?" He raised the book in the air. "No, sir," she said. "You saw the books yourself this morning. They were all correct. I would never allow that sort of filth in my classroom." The officer nodded, then turned to the student on the floor. He pressed his knee into their back. "Do not resist! I said do not resist!" Aggressively, he cuffed the student's hands behind their back. And as quickly as the officers had barged in, they left, now dragging the student behind them. The class was visibly disturbed, not so much from the treatment of their fellow classmate, but rather from the idea that such a book had been in their presence all this time. They carefully studied their books, ensuring none of those words had somehow managed to jump into theirs. Comforted by their discoveries, they returned their attention to their spilled out belongings. "Take the next few minutes to clean up your belongings," said Mrs. Estrada. "We will resume reading in 3 minutes." As the students slowly cleaned their belongings, their pencils, their binders, their notebooks, their guns, their lunch pails, their pocket knives, their textbooks, their electronics, and returned them to their backpack, Mrs. Estrada hid behind her desk. Tears poured from her silently. She could not let the students hear her, nor the cameras overhead see. Beneath her desk, visible only from her crouching position, were several tallies scratched into the wood. Mrs. Estrada took a pocket knife from her own pocket and extended one of the blades. Quietly, she etched one more tally into the wood alongside the rest, now 12 in total, and took a moment to mourn the ones she had been unable to save. Then she thought of the others, the ones she had saved, at least if only for a moment, the ones she had been able to introduce to ideas the state had forbidden. She remembered why she made the switch to education in the first place, to protect the kids, or at least the ones she could. Once she had regained her composure enough to continue, she stood and grabbed her copy of Love the Way God Intended. "Okay, class," she said, her voice slightly shaking. "What page were we on again?" 15, called one student. "That's right," said Mrs. Estrada. "Please turn back to page 15. Everyone returned to page 15, except for 3. who still have their copies of We Do Not All Love the Same and That's Okay open in front of them.